which brings me to the next matter, again taking them out of order because we have a sponsor waiting. This bill is House 5095, sponsored by Chairwoman Falella. It's an act related to Business and Professions Board of Medical Licensure and Discipline. It increases the maximum fine amounts for those found guilty of unprofessional conduct by the Board of Medical Licensure and Discipline from $10,000 to $30,000, and establishes a new chapter of the general law which gives the board authority to levy those fines. Yes.
Is it 5098?
I apologize. 5098.
Thank you.
New glasses, John. They are, really. Trying to find that spot where you read from. Representative Falella.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for having me here tonight to introduce House Bill 5098. This legislation was introduced by Representative Jacquard last year, who worked with Neil Heidemann and Dr. McDonald to draft this legislation. This legislation was prompted by the loss of Louis Ryan Massimini. Ryan had been diagnosed with Huntington's disease in the past. In your packet, which was provided by from the father of the deceased, along with I provided you with a list of the doctors from the Department of Health website with the different reprimands and suspensions. But in your packet, you will see a complaint from the father of the deceased who brought this complaint to the Department of Health, whereas the doctor in question was given a fee and a reprimand. Also in your packet, you will see a list of states who impose fines, not fees. Also enclosed is a list of disciplinary actions that I printed from the Department of Health website from the dates January 2019 through February 2021. The packet also shows a list of the medications that Ryan was taking. This legislation would impose a fine instead of a fee. The fine is a bit higher, as you can see, than what the doctor was given in that order. Ryan was most definitely overprescribed, as you can see on that med sheet, and also that he had suicidal tendencies and thoughts. You will hear shortly from the father, who is on the line, giving you the story as well. But I hope you would consider this legislation for your consideration, and if so, if I could file an amendment, be offered to name this Ryan's Law. Thank you, and if anyone has any questions, I'd be willing to try to answer them.
Any questions of the sponsor? Seeing none, we have two witnesses. I believe, are they both on the line? Because it's the same number. Yeah. Joseph Marenzi and Lou Massimini. One or both of them on the line now? Mr. Marenzi?
No, this is Lou Massimini.
Lou, how are you? This is Bob Craven. You're testifying before the House Judiciary Committee. You can...
Oh, hi, Bob. How are you?
Good, man. How you doing?
Very good. You know, Bob, this happened January 8th of 2019. My son passed away. And this year I've been working with Dr. McDonald because when my son had Huntington's disease, and he was given all this medication. There's a list of medications. I don't know if Debbie gave you the folder, and if you guys looked at it.
We did, and yes, we had an opportunity to look at it.
Okay, and all that medication, he used to, I used to tell him, I say, Ryan, we used to call him Ryan. Ryan, you sleep all day and you'd be up all night. He said, well, that's my medication. So I went to the doctor with him, and I asked the doctor, I said, does he need all this medication? This was his neurologist because he had Huntington's disease. So he says, oh, yes, he does. So I'm saying, okay, that's fine. He needs it. So my son used to, he'd come home and he'd carry his bag with him. And I said, Ryan, what's that? That's my medication for Huntington's. So anyway, on 12/8 of 2018, he tried to commit suicide because he was on the medication for Huntington's disease. He was in the hospital until the 11th. On the 11th, they released him. And they specifically wrote on the release form, get off 3 medications. It was clozapam, oxycodone, and trazodone. Now, the oxycodone he was on because he had colitis. And his primary care doctor used to give him oxycodone once a month. So, like I said, he left on the 11th. He went and see his primary care doctor on the 17th of December, so 6 days later, and he gives him 60 oxycodone. So in the state of mind he was in, because he tried to commit suicide, he gives him the 60 oxycodone. That Monday night, he come in, he was out, he came in at just before the game, because he liked to watch football, and he says, I'm going to go watch the game down the street. I says, Ryan, why don't you stay home? He says, no, I'm going to watch the game. So he did. And that night is the night when he took 27 oxycodone. 27. Now, the other thing is, the Department of Health, McDonald's, I filed a complaint with the Department of Health. And they found, I don't know if I should mention the doctor's name. Is it all right to mention the doctor's name?
I prefer you didn't, because there's a case pending.
All right. Okay. So they found the doctor guilty on 5 counts because like I said, I worked with Dr. McDonald. And I says, well, what happened to him? Did he get, a fine or anything? He says, Rhode Island is the only state in the country that does not implement a fine. It's a fee. It's a $1,200 fee. So I says, a $1,200 fee. I says, my son lost his life because of neglect from this doctor because he wasn't paying attention, and he wants to see more patients because that's how they make more money, I'm assuming, right? So they slapped him on the wrist, they gave him a $1,200 fine, and he's still practicing. So I says, so we were talking, he says, Josh Miller had put in a bill, I guess the year before it didn't pass. I said, send me a copy of the bill, let me look at it. So I looked at the thing, I changed a few of the from $1,200, we went to $5,000 to $25,000. You'll see it in that piece of paper there. And Neil Heidemann, critiqued it a little bit. So, and the other thing is, though, there's a website from the Department of Health. It's disciplinary actions for physicians. There's 12 pages of physicians that had either a reprimand or, I guess a suspension. Some of the doctors on this list, and it should be in your packet, they're on there 7, 8 times. Because they slap them on the wrist and they keep practicing. Now, that's why I think this bill is very important to everybody.
This isn't a doctor.
My son, he brought up the right, the right way, assuming. He graduated from Bryant College. He was, he had Huntington's disease, like his mother passed away from Huntington's disease. And he watched her for 10 years. And he's slowly seen her deteriorate. That's why he had them test him. And you could never, there's no cure for Huntington's disease. There's just, deterioration. And he's seen his mother do that. So when he was put, like I said, on that medication, and he started to, like, not feel good, he'd take more. And in the research, all the medication he was on causes suicidal thoughts. That's what it causes. So anyway, I would appreciate if you guys would, look at this bill and hopefully pass it, because like I was telling Dr. McDonald this morning, because he called me. He says he wanted to testify, but he couldn't. I says, doctor, I says, I go to the cemetery 2-3 times a day to visit my son. And I said, you have a doctor here that did this to my son, and he's talking to his son. Me, I'm praying for my son. But I'm going to have you, I wrote a story about my son, and my buddy Joe is going to read it to you. All right?
Thanks, Lou. Joe, you're up.
There you go, Joe.
Okay, thank you. This is written by Lewis, and it's a little about Ryan. My son Ryan was diagnosed with Huntington's disease 5 years ago at the age of 35. Huntington's disease, or HD, is a fatal genetic disorder that causes a progressive breakdown of the nerve cells in the brain. HD is known as a family disease because every child of a parent with HD has a 50-50 chance of inheriting this fatal gene, and there is no cure. Ryan knew this all too well. Ryan watched his mother slowly deteriorate from the disease for 10 years and finally succumb to the disease and pass away. After his mother passed away, he decided to be screened for the illness. He tested positive for the disease, and physicians began treating Ryan for the illness, and he was not the same person. The advised treatments were various medications, including opiates. He soon became dependent upon these medications to function. This once active member of society, who graduated with an accounting degree from Bryan College, was now having behavioral changes. He began sleeping most of the day and would be up all night. These changes became alarming to me, and I asked Ryan if he needed all these medications. He said to me, come to the doctor with me. So I went with him to the physician and asked the physician if he needed all these medications. The physician replied, yes, he does. Believing the physician, I was still concerned and became alarmed when I would see Ryan always leaving the house carrying a backpack. When I confronted him about carrying the backpack, he would reply, that's my medications and I need it, Dad. This continued dependency on these medications turned him into an addict. This physician's constant prescribing of these addictive opiates was a major contributing factor in his dependency. My son passed away due to the dependency of these medications and eventually accidental overdose from the medication. His doctor continued to enjoy their families while I have to visit my son in the cemetery. Ryan's son, my grandson Carmen, has been robbed of a father because of this addiction. I never want this to happen to another family again. With the passing of Ryan's bill, I hope to stop unnecessary and dangerous overprescribing of opiates by incompetent physicians. Physicians need to take the time to treat patients' diseases without relying on just prescribing addictive medications as a panacea. With the passage of Ryan's bill, I hope the stricter fines and not fees will be a deterrent to discourage physicians in this dangerous practice. Thank you, Lou Massimini. Thank you for listening to my recitation of that.
All right, thank you. Hello? Hello?
Lou, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I don't think there are any questions, but I just want to make a human observation. You're a very strong man to be able to talk about this in such an open place. I can't imagine what the loss is like, but we'll do our best to see if we can right or wrong. Does that sound good?
Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it. Do it for my son.
I will.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Hang in there.
All right, bye. Bye. Thank you.
Okay, that concludes testimony on House Bill 5098. And we go on to,
Mr. Chairman,
yes?
it's Rep. Knight.
Oh, there you are.
I have a question for the sponsor if she's still around.
Yes, she is. She had her jacket on and her pocketbook, and she was ready to go out the door.
I'm sorry, I was absorbing all this during the gentleman's testimony. I just,
Yeah.
Yes,
if she'd be willing to.
yes, Representative Knight.
Is there some, beyond just providing for a fine and calling it a fine, do you happen to know if there's some functional reason to have a fine in the law and to allow the health department to impose one? Does it have some other repercussion on the license that we haven't talked about today?
In that list, that packet, it shows some of the doctors had suspensions, reprimands, different types of actions were given. I think the only reason we just want to make it a fine, to make it more substantial, to make the fine heftier, to maybe give the doctors some thought before writing such prescriptions constantly, the same type of prescription, maybe giving them a little pause, especially when so many of those medications do cause suicidal tendencies. So I think just the fact of a heftier fine just could be a deterrent.
All right, I understand that. And frankly, I think the Department of Health has the nuclear option already in the law where they can just revoke the license. But what I'm wondering is, and maybe we ought to know before we take another pass at this bill, is what does having a fine on your record do when you try to go to another state and practice?
Could I answer that?
There's something about that.
Jason, I think Doc Kovesi might know more about this than you and I do.
Well,
Doc?
I don't know about that, Representative Knight. If I'm can you hear me?
Yes.
If I'm understanding what you're trying to get at, whether it's this state or another state, in addition to the fines and/or restrictions the Department of Health has on a license, keep in mind that every year, at least for me every year, physicians, it may be 2 or 3 years, when we have to reapply for our malpractice insurance, there's a list of questions that we have to answer. And one of them is, has there been any disciplinary action? Have there been any fines? Okay, so the actual licensure process aside, there's also the question of whether or not, what type of an impact a censure or a disciplinary action or a fine would have on your attaining your malpractice insurance, which is as devastating if there's a problem with that as it is to your license, as far as I'm concerned. I don't know if that helps you with what you were looking to get at.
Well, I think that's the case, and I'm, it's what I'm thinking is like, when I think of a doctor who screws up on the level that we have heard tonight, right, is engaged in outright negligence, there's all kinds of rain that's going to come down on that person. There's a negligence action in Superior Court. There's problems with the license just from the disciplinary proceeding. And, a $1,000 or $2,000 fine, I don't think is going to make a ton of difference, except if, and this is what I'm wondering if anyone knows, and it sounds like, you've addressed the malpractice part, but I wonder if when that doctor runs across state line to try to get licensed somewhere else, because that happens sometimes with people who have these professional problems, if having a fine on their record is a different kind of red flag than just some sort of probationary proceeding.
I can't address over state lines, but it just occurred to me as I'm sitting here, it could jeopardize your membership on a panel for health insurance.
I think it's a bigger deal than just the money, frankly. That's my suspicion.
I would agree with you, Representative Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Place.
So on that exchange, Dr. Carvesi, would you, saying that it does affect more, is that an endorsement of the legislation, or is that a critique of the legislation?
What I was trying to do by my explanation with Representative Knight's fairly probing question was to try to add perhaps a little more context to what could be considered the ramifications of this. I think that I think this is the type of bill that certainly requires, we talk about the phrase hold for further study. This is certainly a bill that needs that. There may be some accommodations that can be made with this bill. I would have to think about it. I mean, this requires a great deal of thought. I certainly am in sympathy with the testimony here given by Representative Fallo's constituent. It's a tragic thing. But as Representative Knight and I have both had in that very brief exchange, there's a lot more meat to this.
Thanks, Doc. Any more questions? Okay, that concludes testimony on House Bill 5098.